to today's podcast. I am Pat Soldano, president of Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. If you don't know who we are, we advocate at a national level in Washington, D.C. for family businesses and successful families, all sizes of business and all industries. Today, we're delighted to have with us two Ernst Young family office executives, Catherine Fankhouser and John Fitton, to speak with us on how family offices can support families' needs, a very complex subject. Catherine is a partner and practice leader, Family Office Advisory Services, Ernst Young, LLP. Catherine supports families to elevate their offices, people, processes, and technology to enable scalability and long-term successes. Prior to joining EY, she was a director of finance in a single-family office. Her experience centers on holistic transformations for single-family offices. She's led the modernization of accounting, finance, and treasury functions by integrating siloed teams, redesigning processes to strengthen controls, and automating tasks through technology. John Fitton is a senior manager in EY's Family Office Advisory practice. He works alongside families to design or redesign their family offices to meet their strategic objectives and support their family legacy. John's focus is on matching people, process, and technology solutions to meet family offices and family office requirements. Additionally, John has experience designing the parallel governance structure which governs the family and the family office organizations. So welcome to both of you today. It's a pleasure to have you on this podcast.
Thanks for having us, Pat.
So let's jump right in. And this question, the first question is going to be for both of you. And that is, can you share a little bit more about your backgrounds and how you ended up working alongside enterprising family and single family offices? And Catherine, I'll start with you.
Great. So, Pat, I've actually spent my whole life in and around family-owned business. I grew up G3 of my own family-owned business before, like any good G3, went to decide to do something else other than work in my family business. So it's part of who I am. It's what I grew up with, and it really created that passion to continue to support enterprising families as they look to sustain generation after generation.
Well, I love the fact that you're a third generation family business owner. That's amazing. So John, how about you?
Like Catherine, I also grew up in a family business, though in the Midwest. And really with family business as a base, I've always believed in the strength and benefits of private capital in our economy and our society. That's why I work with our team at EY and with our clients who share that belief.
So I'm going to ask this question again of Catherine first, but John, you can also comment on it. And that is, how would you define a family office? It's talked about a lot. We work with a lot of family businesses, as I indicated, and many of them think that they should have or be part of a family office. So how would an enterprising owning family consider setting one up?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a complex question, largely because there seem to be so many answers out there. So it makes it difficult for people to truly understand whether or not one might apply. For us, so when John and I, when we work with families, we believe that a family office is really a collection of services. At its heart, it is things that a family needs just because of who they are, being an enterprise owning family. It can cover wealth management, tax, insurance, bill pay, coordination of advisors. And oftentimes when we talk to enterprise owning families, they already have those services. They're things that they need. And oftentimes when you go through and you ask family members, do you have legal advice? Do you have accountants? Well, yes and yes. I jokingly say, well, you have a family office. It's just not defined. And so the question isn't, do I need one or do I not need one? Because at the end of the day, you need the services. It's about the professionalization of those services and how much of a wrapper do I want to put around those services? And drivers for the professionalization might be risk management, privacy, buying power, even complexity of the family's needs.
So I think you made a really important point, is that people don't realize that they may already have all of those various services of a family office at their disposal. So let's talk about, we know that all family offices aren't the same, but what are those different models? And John, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Sure. I think if 25 years ago you Googled family office, you'd get a smattering of results and most of them wouldn't apply. I think that's changed drastically. And today you're going to receive way too many results. So what are the types of family offices we think about? I'd say we see three in the market, the most common, and that would be an embedded family office, a single family office, and then a multifamily office. And just like really quickly on those three, when we think about an embedded family office, it's where a lot of people start. It's inside of their business if they own a business. It's traditionally a little bit more cost efficient and it uses the resources and the infrastructure of the business to support family services. Then we think about the single family office, that's a standalone entity. They've either lifted out of the operating company or they've sold the operating company and they've started a single family office, which is a standalone entity and would provide a little bit more privacy, control, and customization to the family. It also comes with a little bit higher setup and operating costs than leaving it embedded. Sometimes when people think about single family offices, they think, oh, well, I hire a bunch of people and they perform all the services. Very often in single family offices, we see there's still a lot of outsourced providers who are outside the four walls of the single family office. So just wanted to make that distinction. And the third one is a multifamily office. And that's really a third party firm that specializes and serves multiple unrelated ultra high net worth families in a shared service model. It's typically less personalized, less customized, but is often more cost efficient than a single family office.
Yeah. So, John, you're spot on in thinking about it in those three categories. And Pat, we talk a lot about family office being a continuum. So it's not like John did a great job identifying what you might call like these mile marker structures. But in reality, what we find is it blends along that continuum. And that's why you get to the point where each family office is slightly differently because they don't fit in one of those square boxes exactly.
That's where we hear the term hybrid family office a lot too.
Well, and I've seen in the embedded family office that the family business can sometimes suffer because the family office is conflicted a lot of times between, well, what do I just serve first? Do I serve the personal finances of the family or do I serve the business? And so example is you may have an accountant on board who's like, do I pay the family's bills or do I pay the business bills? Or a CPA or a lawyer that's, again, conflicted. Do I handle the personal legal affairs of the individual family member or do I handle the business? And so I've seen many times that embedded family office can be difficult. What has been your experience with that?
Well, you're spot on. And we so agree. John and I run a workshop for business owning families who are thinking about setting up a family office. And one of the exercises we do is with the enterprise executives, asking them how much time they spend on the business versus the family. And it's just 0 to 100%. And we ask them to place a marker kind of where they fall. And it's so funny because the patriarch may think, or the founder operator may say, oh, well, they're only spending 10% on my personal stuff. It doesn't really make an impact. And the CFO or another executive might say, no, it's closer to 30 or 40%. And so there's this aha moment that goes on to say, well, if the family business is the golden goose that lays the golden eggs, do I really want my CFO focused on being a good CFO for that business? Or do I want them renegotiating my mortgage or some other type of activity that's important, but not at the same degree for that individual? John, anything else you want to chime in on what we see here?
I love when we see it in the room. It's a fun conversation to have. And I think it's also one of those trigger points. We talked about embedded family office versus single family office. Exactly what you bring up, Pat, that ends up being a trigger point for when families will start to think about making that transition from an embedded family office that sits inside to a true standalone single family office.
Yep. And just to finalize that thread, John, because I'm glad you said it, trigger point. So what other inflections would cause an embedded office to lift out? So one would be your executives can't keep the main thing because they're being distracted. And then two would be privacy. So if there are affairs of the family that you don't necessarily want the persons inside of the business to be aware of, those tend to be the two most common inflection points that we see for a family to go from embedded to standalone.
Well, so you touched on this a little bit, but can you expand a little bit more on outsourcing versus, doing things inside the family office and kind of describe what that means?
Yeah, it's a great thing to go back to because it definitely bears discussion. So when we talk about insource or outsource, what we're getting at is the office's operating model. And we're saying, how are they determining to leverage or deliver these services? So when we use the words insource, what we mean is that the family has elected to staff up, so to speak, with their own humans and infrastructure. I'm going to build my own systems. I'm going to put in infrastructure, actually do this myself. That's in contradiction to outsource, which is where I'm going to leverage someone else's humans or technology or expertise or infrastructure. And there's this third pillar in between called co-source, where it's a shared relationship. But when a family, the determination to provide a service is binary. Am I going to do tax or am I not? But then when it comes to how am I going to deliver that, that's where you start to get into this operating model conversation about, and then how am I going to deliver that service? And outsource is actually growing significantly. So a couple of data points for you. So it used to be single family offices wanted to staff up everything inside, that when you built an office, you did it yourself. And what we're seeing is that our 2022 global single family office survey, it showed that 67% of family offices were currently outsourcing or considering it. And then we also recently ran a tax and finance operate survey for all of EY, not just family offices, but all of our clients. And 87% of all businesses, not just family offices, were actually considering outsourcing in tax and finance. And so we're seeing this trend, and where it used to be a barrier to entry to say, wow, I've got to create a lot of infrastructure, we're now seeing family offices with much lighter footprints because they don't need teams of accountants and data entry and bill pay clerks because they're using someone else's infrastructure.
I think the challenge to the outsourcing is the coordination of all of those outsourcing, right? Outsourced resources. Because that's one of the big advantages of a family office is it's kind of one-stop shopping. You've got everything in one place, and you've got hopefully a manager person that's coordinating all of those various resources. So let's talk more about the types of family offices. So when a family starts, what are the advantages or disadvantages of one over another? You talked about that a little bit already, but as it relates to specific models of a family office, single family office, multifamily office.
Yeah, and John, I know I dug into the inflection points. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about why we think that embedded family offices are so easy to get started with, especially since these families are generally already providing these types of services.
Number one is trust. You have those around you that you trust, that know you. Not only do they know you and your family, but they also know the services you require because of the assets you own and the businesses investments you own, how you make decisions. I think that's probably number one. The thing that distinguishes, Pat, when we think about the transition from an embedded to a single family office, those single family offices, they start to provide more privacy, more control. When you're staffing with resources inside of the business, you have a dedicated team, but they cross over business to family. When you make that switch to a single family office that's separate, There's more privacy, more control. It reduces some of that tension that we talked about between the business affairs and the personal affairs. You just have to deal with the higher costs, but it's balanced with the long-term benefits. And the long-term benefits, I think, are clear governance and alignment of family ownership and business strategy. And I know we kind of transitioned there from talking about the benefits of embedded family offices to talking about the differences, but I think that's really the key point there.
Yeah. And John, the other thing I love that you touched on are what we talk about the dimensions to selection of type of family office. And in some ways, Pat, talking about operating model and the type of family and operating model are almost synonymous to us, because where we start is around services. And so if you've already got a family office, it's just how are we going to deliver those services? And John touched on all four of these items, and I want to just repeat them here because it's so important for your listeners to really understand the impact that these four drivers have on their operating model decision. So the first John mentioned is cost. And I mean, cost in so many ways is a huge determination of how do I want to professionalize these services? Do I want best in class or do I want best in cost? And the family may not feel the same way for every single service. They may be willing to pay more for certain types of expertise than not. The second dimension is risk management, and how much risk management does the family think they need in a particular service delivery area? Is this something that I can do with my bookkeepers and the accountants that I already have inside my operating company? Or do I need dedicated resources with true expertise in that area that I need to go get that is not as common as skill sets that it might already have at hand? The third is privacy. So we've already touched on this as well, but how much privacy do I want around certain family aspects? Are there things that I feel comfortable, not only with the people inside my business understanding, but even third-party providers? There are some families that we know that from a tax compliance arrangement that when our EY tax people go to support on their taxes, we go to their offices and review the tax returns in their office because they don't feel comfortable having that information outside of their four walls. So that privacy, each of these is a continuum, and how the family feels about them will shift you between operating models. And the final one, the fourth one, is control. And what we mean by control is the ability to direct control, is how can I direct an employee to do something? So for example, one of my clients here at EY, they can call me and ask me to do something. They can influence me, but I have the decision what I work on next, that they can't necessarily direct my actions. And when you have captive employees, you have much more ability to direct their activities on a day-to-day basis. So in some ways, talking about embedded or standalone or multifamily, each of those is just a amalgamation of different ways to deliver these services.
How does a family go about deciding if they need a family office? And if so, what kind? And I also like you to talk about, is there a level of assets, liquid assets, maybe versus non-liquid assets that a family would have to have, or some sort of threshold before they start thinking about a family office?
Catherine, why don't I cover the first part of that, and then you can talk a little bit more about AUM.
I love it.
Or the assets required.
Let's do it.
So to go about deciding if you need a family office, the first thing I would do as a family is inventory the current services. I think often when we support families through this process to take an inventory of existing services, there's a surprise that the number is much higher than they had thought, right? That they're already receiving a number of traditional, what we would call family office type services through usually a number of different channels. Once you have that inventory in hand, I'd say take a look at the complexity of your environment and your assets, where it is today. How many generations do you have? What kind of trusts do you have and how are they structured? What's the asset mix you have today? Do you have a concentrated position in a business? And then think long-term. How's that going to change over the next 5, 10, 20 years? Growing families, growing businesses, growing asset pools, changes in how we want to invest together. And then take a look at your existing advisor network. how are those people that are supporting you today supporting you? Are they siloed and doing kind of their own thing over here, or are they well coordinated cross-functionally? For example, I think we talk to families and we say, are your investment professionals, those who are either managing the assets inside the business or a pool held outside, are they coordinated with those who are doing your tax planning team, whether it's insourced or outsourced, right? And this is some of the quarterbacking we were talking about. Does the team that's handling the design of your estate, do they understand what your liquidity needs are today for either your portfolio or for your business? And then do they understand what your goals are for that going forward into the next 20 years? And then the last thing, we talked a lot about this on dimensions, is how do you feel about privacy and control and cost? And that will help dictate, all right, here's how I feel about this. And that's based on those things, how I feel, this is how I should set up my family office or thinking about starting to set it up. But Catherine, maybe talk a little bit about when people hit those triggers. And one of those trigger points that we talked about earlier, Pat, you're right, is how much money do we have, right?
Yeah. So an embedded family office is low cost of entry. To, again, going back to that continuum of what a family office could be, at the far lowest touch end, we call that a founder's office, where there's potentially an executive assistant who's booking travel, maybe paying some bills, but the suite of services that executive assistant is doing on behalf of the founder is just a very tiny family office. And so to get started with a family office is actually a very low cost of entry. You probably have one today. It's then as you start to move towards the other end of the continuum where you are hiring individuals, you're putting in technology, you're building infrastructure, that's where it starts to get more costly. And so I think when people ask this question, they are looking at that far end of the continuum at the full service standalone family office. And that number ranges. I've seen it distilled down. City Private Bank several years ago had a mathematical formula that you could look at to try and tell you the right number. Other people say it's a range. I would say, based on our experience, to have a full standalone single family office, it is generally about the $1 billion mark. And that's if you're insourcing the investment function. That tends to be the most expensive task or service to provide yourself. And it requires a totally different team, totally different types of systems. And so to be at that, if you want to fully insource your investment due diligence, analysis, performance reporting, it's about that $1 billion mark. John and I know a lot of families who are a lot less than that. And so, I mean, it is a range, but I would say really the low end is maybe half, like $500 million, but then you're really relying on outsourced services and you're much more of a quarterback in those situations.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's where the MFO model really helps those families, because I share this with people all the time. Even as a small multifamily office is what I had, you have an issue finding that talent and providing a succession plan for that talent, a career path, right? If you don't have enough assets in place, and absolutely the investment officer person is critical and probably one of the most expensive individuals in that family office. And again, they need enough assets to keep them there and to let them grow within that organization.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Pat. Like, that was why I left the family office I was at, was because I was young and was going to be a director of finance forever. Like, there wasn't a great career path because the family wasn't growing rapidly enough. I do want to mention, just touch quickly on the comment you made about multifamily office. What we see is, even for families who are leveraging multifamily office, there are still things that occur outside of that MFO. And families are still hiring one or two people as quarterbacks to provide complementary services to those MFOs. And so, just for your listeners to think about, I think that there's this idea that there are these groups out there, these MFOs that become these one-stop shops. In the industry, what we do see is it's an MFO plus model that still has a couple additional people that support the MFO, get them information, and then provide really hands-on support for the family directly.
Well, how about some final thoughts around families that are thinking about this for the first time, either a family office themselves or joining a multifamily office, or as you've talked about, the embedded family office, any kind of closing comments that you'd like to give us?
We talked a little bit about, 25 years ago, not a lot of names in the hat with respect to people who support families in the billion and above mark. And today the family office term on Google is so vast. I'd say take time and due diligence to find great partners to support you, and then trust them to support you. And the second thing I'd say is think long term. Don't make it too complicated today, but definitely think generationally at the beginning. Build for legacy, build for leadership, and build for your family unity over the long haul.
Right. I totally agree. And then, Pat, I would say from my perspective is think about your family office as a business. And while might not be much top line like you would be accustomed to, it still should be run no different than any other business. I understand the expenses, what's the model. We often approach our family office design and setups just like a business plan. So for your listeners, these tremendous family entrepreneurs, putting it in that context, it makes it a little less esoteric. It makes it something much more tangible. If I'm just building another business, it just so happens to be a business that's in the business of my family.
Great, excellent advice. I really appreciate both of you being on this podcast with us today. Catherine and John, thank you for your great wisdom. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
So we hope you liked today's podcast, and if you did, please subscribe. With each episode, we discuss the critical issues affecting family-owned businesses, family offices, and successful families around the country. You can find this podcast wherever you download your podcast. Until next time, thank you for listening.